smart speaker on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com.
7:06, the news, the service of Staples stores. Staples has everything to start the school year right. Amazing prices. 2-pack of Elmer's glue sticks, 24-pack of Crayola crayons, and comp books, 50 cents each. Offer ends 9/5 while supplies last, limit 30. Limits vary online at Staples. Team Hochberg Traffic Center time now, and Jim Telemonte.
Inbound Eisenhower at North Avenue. Watch out for a crash on the right shoulder. And traffic's a little heavy as well from Mannheim to Des Plaines Avenue. The drive time is 30 minutes from 390 to downtown, outbound 29. Inbound Kennedy, things have cleared up after some late clearance of overnight road work around Montrose. It's now 20 minutes, O'Hare to downtown, outbound the same. And the Edens is cleared up after an earlier vehicle fire at Niles Center Road. Mount Stevenson, traffic is tight approaching the Rhine, especially on the right side. 29 minutes, 355 to Lakeshore Drive. And on Ryan, traffic is slow from 95th to 71st, and from the Stevenson on in, it's 22 minutes from 95th to downtown. That's traffic. I'm Jim Telemonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next. In our AM 560 Weather Center, our meteorologist, Steve Williams.
Clouds and some rain this morning, maybe a thunderstorm for late this afternoon. The high today 74. Evening thunderstorm around tonight, otherwise cloudy, low 63. A partly sunny day tomorrow, the high tomorrow at 85. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
70 at O'Hare, next news 7:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by the Money Hour radio show, Saturday afternoons at 3 on AM 560, The Answer. Brought to you by Pearshell Financial Group.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM
Fox News. And his assessment of why there has been such reticence on behalf of leftists, including the Biden-Harris ticket, to condemn violence.
But they won't ever criticize anybody that really, that's a violent person, frankly, that's violent. They stick up for the violence. They don't, the people that are getting hurt, they don't care about. They don't care about these people. It's a weird thing. It's like warped minds. And for the last 93 days, I've been offering to send, and as you know, they have to take the offer. They have to ask to have help. I've been standing and I've been saying, anytime you're ready, we'll put it out.
What's motivating them, Mr. President?
I think it's a sickness, actually. I think there's a fear. I watched the way they treated this Mayor Wheeler when he was standing there, and I'll tell you how unfair the news is. NBC News didn't show that he was being shouted at and cursed at, and he ran, literally, he had to run for his life because they were going to really hurt him. He had security. If he didn't, he would have probably...
Well, they showed up as an apartment building over the weekend.
No, how he can still stick up for him. I think there's a fear. I think he's afraid.
Yeah, there's definitely also some need for institutional care for some of these mayors and governors, no question. President Trump also with a message to his supporters. He doesn't want his supporters to replace the police officers in terms of the primary people keeping the peace.
The left-wing protesters, or do you want to leave it to law enforcement?
No, I don't want them. I want to leave it to law enforcement. But my supporters are wonderful, hardworking, tremendous people. And they turn on their television set and they look at a Portland or they look at a Kenosha before I got involved and stopped it. Or they look at Chicago where 78 people were shot last weekend and numerous people died. Or they look at New York, where violence is up by 150%. It's up by a number that nobody, and people are leaving. They're looking at all of this, and they can't believe it. They can't believe it, whether it's my supporter or not.
But you don't want them showing up.
No, I don't. Well, it's a peaceful protest. I mean, they were protesting. They weren't. It's amazing. They want to protest, and they get criticized. The other people run through the streets, burn down storefronts, hurt people, beat people, and kill people, kick people in the face. That would have happened to Rand Paul, by the way, and his wife.
Mm-hmm. Rand Paul and his wife leaving the RNC, and others that were accosted as well leaving the RNC last week. Here's an important point, and it's highlighted by Mark Hemingway in his most excellent piece on Portland native himself, third generation Oregonian. Mark Hemingway. I remember this piece on former mayor and then governor that Mark Hemingway wrote back when the Weekly Standard was still around. It was on Neil Goldschmidt, who was perhaps the most influential mayor in Portland in the last 50 years, went on to become governor. The key here is that as people are looking around and they can't believe what's happening, it's a reminder that, to borrow from The Sun Also Rises, and answer to the question, how did you go bankrupt? Gradually, then suddenly. How did we get to this cultural disintegration? Gradually and now suddenly. It's been 50 years in a lot of these cities, including Chicago. 50 years in Portland, too. President Trump, in that interview with Ingram, talked about how long Portland has been trending towards anarchy. And Hemingway backs him up with some real-world examples. In April 2017, 4 months after becoming mayor, Ted Wheeler canceled the city's annual Rose Parade after Antifa threatened violence because among the many civic groups marching the parade was the Multnomah County GOP. You have seen how much power we have downtown, and the police cannot stop us from shutting down roads, so please consider your decision wisely. That was a message that Antifa said to Mayor Wheeler 3 years ago.
Wow, so this has been going on for a long time.
In 2018, Wheeler, who also serves as the police commissioner, ordered officers to take a hands-off approach to protesters who had set up camp in front of the city's ICE building, trap federal employees inside, vandalize their cars. Though the protest camp generated nearly 60 calls to police over 40 days, Wheeler publicly supported the vandals.
Oh, my gosh.
This is all foreshadowing for what Portland has become the last 90 days. And you want to go back further?
Yes.
This is just incredible. Everything is political culture. Political culture. I say it all the time, and nobody listens, particularly in Chicago, but it doesn't make it any less true. You want to set up another program, another institution. To borrow from von Mises, we need a new mentality, not merely a new institution, in order to improve conditions. And that's the case in big cities around the country. And maybe in some it's coming. Chicago and Portland, I don't think so. Neil Goldschmidt, not only was he an influence peddler when he was governor, he admittedly had an affair with his children's babysitter over the course of 3 years, starting with when she was 14.
Come on.
His surprising exit from public life back in 1990 was part of a private settlement he negotiated with the victim. Goldschmidt had taken the girl to parties. His relationship was known to many of the state's power brokers, many of whom are still active in Oregon politics today. No one said anything for decades. In a May 2004 statement to the Oregonian, Mr. Goldschmidt acknowledged having had what he called, quote, an affair with a high school student for nearly a year. He retreated to his estate in the south of France after his political career was over in Portland and Oregon. His victim, the 14-year-old, Elizabeth Lynn Dunham, lived a life of tragedy and addiction and died in hospice in 2011 at the age of 49.
Oh, he ruined her life.
But none of that matters as long as you're the beacon of progressivism, which is a synonym for barbarism. And that's where we are. For more on all this, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Roger Kimball. He's the editor of the New Criterion and also a frequent writer in other outlets, including Spectator USA. Roger and Am Greatness. Roger, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Yep. Yeah, my pleasure, guys.
So I know your recent column, you're imbued with a new sense of confidence after the RNC last week, and I want to get to that. But just, I mean, because you're an intellectual and you have a historical perspective here, which we're trying to talk about. We're just living in this moment of what's happened in the last 90 days rather than reflecting on what's happened in the last 50 or 60 years in these big cities.
Yes.
And I wanted to get your comments.
Yeah. Well, you pointed out that what's happening in places like Portland, it's not new. It's been going on for some time, and the pusillanimous leaders of these cities and states have done everything they can to invite the violence by their policy of appeasement on the one hand and their kind of dissemination of every liberal and progressive cliche under the sun. But of course, it goes back even much further than 2017. I think you mentioned 2017. There was an Antifa march, and they essentially threatened the city leaders that if they didn't do what they wanted, there would be trouble. And of course, it goes back. It goes back even further. It goes back to the late 60s and 70s, when we had a very similar kind of uprising. Many of the same themes. There was a big racial theme. There was a socialism is good theme. There was a we have to tear down this horrible country theme. There was riots in the streets. There were political assassinations. It was a grim time. A friend of mine who had lived in I think Seattle said, it used to be a very nice city, and then all these people, the progressives, kind of moved in, and they essentially turned it over to the anarchists, and that's where we are now. We're in a situation where we are facing what James Burnham, the great political philosopher James Burnham, called cultural suicide. This is the philosophy of a certain species of perverted liberalism that substitutes progressive nostrums and a sort of hypertrophied tolerance, which turns into its opposite, turns into sort of intolerance.
And the cultural suicide, I just want to pick up on that, because that's what the topic Victor Davis Hanson tackled in his recent column in American Greatness. And he writes, the story of all dark ages is that when civilizations finally prefer suicide, they do it easily. And the remnants flock to the countryside to preserve what they can, allowing the cities to go on with their ritual self-destruction. So it has begun to seem this endless summer. Is that what you see happening, is the abdication from the cities and allow them to implode?
Well, yes, so some cities. And you will note, by the way, that I think without exception, I can't think of any exception, they're all Democratic-run cities. So in other words, they're cities that have given up on such things as fiscal responsibility, on keeping order. And people talk about the phrase "law and order" is interesting. People say, "Oh well, I remember William Sloane Coffin, the chaplain of Yale University back in the early '70s, said that social justice is more important than law and order. It's a more important value." Not realizing, of course, that you don't get justice without law and order. That's what justice is. It's the prerequisite of order. And what we're seeing now is these little bonfires of anarchy, which means no order. It's against order, and it's a very odd moment. I believe in my heart, frankly, that we will overcome this. But it's touch and go at the moment. I mean, that little video of Rand Paul and his wife struggling the couple of blocks to get back to their hotel is terrifying. It wasn't just Rand Paul, by the way. I mean, my friend Devin Nunes faced something very, very similar. And what they've done to Alice Johnson, the lady who was let out from jail by President Trump, who gave that marvelous speech at the RNC. She too has been accosted and warned by Van Jones not to tell people that she had been accosted. But what we see here with the difference, I think, the real difference between now and the late 60s and early 70s is that even the people who we have entrusted and the institutions we've entrusted with perpetuating our civilization, they too have kind of gone over to the dark side. So whereas in the late 60s and 70s, you could still rely on, the business community, for example, to rally around American values, I'm not sure you can do that anymore. Just the spectacle of Nike or Brooks Brothers or all these other corporations instantly capitulating and sending to their customers by email their little bulletins announcing their solidarity with Black Lives Matter, an organization that is confessedly Marxist, that is confessedly dedicated to the destruction of the nuclear family, who explicitly espouses violence, and it's deeply anti-civilizational. And
well, Roger, I don't know if you heard Biden yesterday in Pennsylvania pretty much threatening, if you don't vote for me, this is going to get worse. And,
yes,
the threat that he made.
Yes, well, and of course, I mean, you were beginning by talking about some of the president's response to this stuff. The irony in all of this is that the Democrats began by saying the riots are a good thing because they're protests of this terrible event in Minneapolis with George Floyd. Then they went on when they realized that the riots were not doing so well with their polls. They said, well, there are no riots. Now they've gotten to the point where they since they can no longer deny it, they say, well, there are riots. They're not good, but they're Trump's fault, which is, of course, absolutely preposterous. But the thing that I think it's difficult for most fair-thinking people to wrap their minds around is how utterly mendacious the mainstream Democratic Party has become. I mean, the fact that Joe Biden could say that when the president has a long history that you can document even on places like CNN of condemning this violence. He's always condemned it. He's always stood up for the rights of blacks in this country, and you can document it time and time and time again. But they'll just lie, and the brazenness of their mendacity is what is really quite breathtaking. They don't care about truth; they care about power. But I think that contrasting the DNC convention and the RNC convention is, I mean, in a way, it's almost sad for the Democrats. I hope not very many of their potential voters were watching, because it was a pathetic performance, whereas the RNC convention was uplifting. They talked about heroes and opportunity and promise. It's it's not surprising to me that Donald Trump got a big bump from that.
And today with
convention,
right? And today with President Trump in Kenosha, it's an opportunity to extend the messaging and market positioning that was reestablished at the convention. In terms of supporting law enforcement, supporting the rule of law, supporting small business owners.
Yeah, I mean, also, I mean, let's be truthful about this. In Minneapolis, people say that George Floyd was murdered. It's not at all clear that he was murdered. The autopsy report suggested he had twice the lethal amount of fentanyl in his system. He had very serious cardiac issues. He died from a drug overdose. And there's been leaked body cam footage from the police that tells a very different story from that the footage that went viral and sparked the riots. Again, in Kenosha, this chap had been sexually abusing this woman for years. She called the police. He behaved very badly, and he had a knife. So it's the story is very different from what we're being told.
Well, and not only that, and it doesn't necessarily legitimize what Derek Chauvin did with George Floyd in Minneapolis. However, I think you're getting to an important point, which is, you want to elevate George Floyd and Jacob Blake to hero status in America. There's going to be a backlash against that, because I'm sorry, what happened to them happened to them to some extent. It was they were contributing at minimum to what transpired by escalating the situation, not complying with police officers. But regardless, they're not heroes. At best, right. They are victims, and that is not something that we elevate. That's not what we put on pedestals. Right. It's what the left may want to, but it's not going to fly.
Well, we shouldn't be celebrating a wife beater. Or a girlfriend beater, excuse me. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's got a litter of children by various women, not his wife. And George Floyd was a career criminal, also abusive of women. It's just ridiculous.
He is Roger Kimball. He's the editor of the New Criterion, and check out his most recent column. After the RNC, I'm confident Trump will be I'm confident Trump will triumph, that is, and I will tweet that out at Dan Proft as well. Roger, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's news, opinion, insight. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
There are a lot of tough questions when thinking about caring for aging parents or loved ones. Most importantly, can they stay safe at home? With Home Care Angels Home Services, they can. Home Care Angels has been caring for seniors in their homes with compassion